Mr. President, members of the legislature, I find the debate to be very provocative. Let me give you a little bit of the language out of the Constitution before I share my thoughts. This is in Article 3, Section 2 of the Nebraska Constitution. The title is First Power Reserved Initiative. Now you recognize that this doesn't come as the preamble or the first chapter of our Constitution, but the title of this is the First Power Reserved. This is how the people view their rights under our state Constitution. The first power reserved by the people is the initiative whereby laws may be enacted and constitutional amendments adopted by the people independently of the legislature. We are unique. Senator Friend has belabored that point this morning. But really this is about, you're welcome, Senator, but really this is probably more of a balance of power issue. Let me give you an example that may try to cast a better light than maybe what Senator Friend did in his example. In the event that Senator Friend's proposal comes out here on the floor and is successful and the voters of the state of Nebraska adopt it, and we run across the hall and open that up and stick some state senators or representatives in there, we wouldn't have the power to tell them how to pass laws. We wouldn't have the power to regulate what laws they could pass. We would all follow the same process that would be outlined for both houses. Now, in our state, we're unique. We have a unicameral. We don't have the ability to say parochially that the same rules that we apply should apply to the electors in the event that they follow a petition process, because they're not going to have 3 readings. They're not going to have committee hearings. But they reserve that right first and foremost as citizens of this state. Now, that was done before we became a unicameral body. But it is always interesting to hear about the arguments that, well, we need to keep these folks out of the state who want to influence our public policy. You know what? There are folks standing back here today that are from out of state that are influencing our public policy, and they have a right to be there. The process that we have is not about making us an island of political process from everybody else in our country and protecting ourselves from the influences that are around us. It's about making sure that in our process, that when the citizens of the state of Nebraska feel that they need the opportunity that they reserve first and foremost, that they have the ability to exercise it. Now, Senator Avery has a different idea of how we can accomplish that, and he's probably going to address that in his remarks, but I know he's got a constitutional amendment that changes the signatures needed and the percentages. But really, why do those folks feel like they need to pay circulators in the first place? Maybe Senator Avery has part of it right. Maybe it's we have placed such a barrier against the citizens exercising their authority as the second house that they have no other option to be that second house than to use that. Now, a lot has been made about the recent petitions. You've got 423. You've had other ideas. We didn't have proposals like this introduced before the legislature when casinos were out running around picking up cash to do this. It was a problem then. We didn't have this issue come forward this way when other circumstances were before the people as a petition. So it's somewhat ironic that when there was an effort made to restrict spending or to control the growth of government, that all of a sudden we rushed to defend ourselves. We can stand by the decisions that we make as a body independently and defend that effectively. Whether we agree or not with the policy, that's what the state legislature of Nebraska has done. But I would caution you in these discussions to get overly parochial and say, well, we have to prevent ourselves from this or that. Those influences are here today. The checks and balances that we have is that you and I have sworn an oath to the Constitution of this state and to the United States to defend it. And we're responsible to the people who elected us. Those same people are going to have an opportunity to vote. And if they were smart enough to send us here to represent them, they're going to be smart enough to see through these other issues. The influence will be there. But I share some of the concerns that Senator Friend has. Maybe not to the goals that he may have, but this is about preserving the opportunity that the people themselves cherish as their first right. And I think we must be careful to analyze whatever decisions that we may make that may infringe upon that. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members of the legislature, if those individuals are running around in a baseball game or something where candidates for office, we dismiss them as just not knowing any better, but once they get a petition in their hand, they grow pointy ears and a tail. And I think that's an interesting analogy because we view this initiative process, and I hope this isn't the case, but I think there's a certain sentiment in our state. We view the initiative process the way that some folks view our process. And I think we have a responsibility when we're elected to this office and to serve in this body, and as we have had many of discussions, whether you're on the right issue or not, or one issue or another, I've always told folks at home when I go out of the Nebraska legislature, whether we leave during the morning debate and we walk out the doors together, hey, it was left inside. We can disagree, but I've never questioned the integrity or the character of the folks who are here. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, people take easy shots at us because we are elected officials. But that also gives us a greater responsibility to make sure that the decisions that we make are appropriate. And I think that's why debates like this are so essential for us to wade through these discussions and make sure that we have reasoned and thought them out together. Senator Adams has brought up some very valuable insight, I think. The analogy or the comment that he made was that he wanted Nebraskans to control Nebraska or Nebraska issues, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Senator. I don't know that I got that exactly right, but last I checked, and this is a quick review of statute, only Nebraskans can vote. So Nebraskans do control Nebraska's future. In the event that you have other politicians or other folks come to our state, they have that right, just as members of this body and former members of this body have gone to other states to lobby on initiative and petition ideas in their states. That give and take is there. But the idea, and for those of you that are new to this process, the idea that somehow something got on the ballot is going to pass. We put stuff on the ballot last year that was non-controversial, that everybody in this body supported, that was a good idea that we thought made sense, and the people voted it down. And I'm not talking about pay raises for senators. I'm talking about common sense ideas that allow nonprofits and other entities to have more tools to be able to better serve the people that they're trying to help. That got voted down. This bill does nothing to affect those processes, and once it gets on the ballot, you still have the campaign. So Nebraskans still control that because only Nebraskans can vote. One of the things that was mentioned that I think needs to be corrected, and I visited with Senator Fulton about his information, the comment, I don't think directly intended to be interpreted, but this is kind of how I took it, that there was a lot of outside influence trying to influence this debate. Senator Fulton's information came directly from his staff and his staff's research, not from anyone else. And a comment was made earlier that those folks behind the glass or outside this body are trying to influence this discussion this morning. I don't think that was intended to be that way, but I wanted to make sure that was reflected. Let me finish up with this, Mr. President. The issues that have been addressed this morning sound to me like a lot of other problems that we have in other statutes, and that is the law needs to be enforced. I don't like the idea of telling somebody who's 16 years old that they can't be a part of the petition process when they can be a poll worker. Why can they be eligible to serve, and this is under the green copy, why should they be able to serve in a capacity as a 16-year-old in our state and working the election board and accepting people's votes, but to tell them that they cannot be a part of the petition process? There are things like that that just don't bear logic, both in existing statute and in fundamental fairness. If folks want to be a part of that process, and this is the and if they follow the law, if they explain the petition, if they understand what their obligations are, and if they sign it accordingly in the conduction of that process, they should be able to do it. There are folks probably 50 years old that probably couldn't do it as well as some of the 16-year-olds because they won't be as vigilant. But to put arbitrary limits and to say they have to be an elector doesn't make them any more qualified. And again, I think it comes back to taking that fundamental view of this process and balancing it. I think if the committee amendment isn't adopted, I think we have bigger problems. I think some of you would like to go further than even this bill allows. But I think we should be reasoned and take one step. And I think General Files is the place to hash this out. If you have ideas, bring them forward. I don't like the idea of simply passing it on to try to work it out. There are appropriate places to do that, but I think we have the time to address it here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Karpyshek, then Nankus, Shimmick, and Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. I agree with
the Government Committee. It is my understanding that 423 was not an out-of-state interest that started it. However, there were others that got involved after the fact. There are individuals from western Nebraska and North Platte specifically that began that process. And so to say that they were started by out-of-state interests, which is what Senator Ingalls said, is not necessarily accurate. But on the bigger sense, I guess the question that I would pose to the body is, if we're going to require that grassroots, and that was the model that Senator Ingalls gave us, that grassroots individuals are the ones that we really want to bring initiatives and petitions and those ideas, then why don't we do it here? Why don't we require so many people to get together in communities across the state before we can introduce a bill? And then the other side of this, how do you know that the good people are introducing the petitions or not? Senator Copeland brings that up accurately. Depending upon what issue you're on, you may not agree that it's a good group. So I think it comes back to the reality that we have to allow the process to weigh out, and ultimately those decisions are made by the voters. The process has to be fair whether you agree with them or not. That's what our process is about. There'll be bills out here that I vehemently disagree with, and there'll be bills out here that I'm going to try to get passed. But the process is the same. We have the rules. Write the rules the same, give everyone the opportunity, and then let the voters, just as we as members, have the opportunity to sort out the issues. And I think it's difficult, based on the political makeup, based on the philosophies, and based on the experiences of Nebraskans and citizens of the United States as a whole, to be able to definitively say who are good grassroots groups and who are not. But out of sake for correcting the record, and my good friend, the benevolent dictator of the exec board, can correct me, but it's my understanding that that petition specifically was started locally, and there were others that came in. Now, other examples that you gave were started by national groups. This didn't happen to be one of them, as I understand the process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Specifically, I pulled my name off this bill about, and as you can see from the committee statement and some of the information that you have in front of you, and for more or less some pretty high-level reasons. I'm not here to stand up and say that this bill shouldn't pass. I'm not here standing to say that it shouldn't have come out of committee. It came out 701. I was not voting. I just wanted to share with you a couple specific reasons, or at least my thought process. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of reasons you would pull your name off of a bill. One could be that somebody could stand out here and say, well, I learned a lesson. I'm not going to sign anything that I don't like in the future. Well, that wasn't, in my case, that wasn't the situation. I signed it. I probably would sign it again if it was presented to me in the way, in the articulate way that Senator Shimmick and the committee proposed the information. Or you pull your name off of something to make a point. I think it could be argued that I would like to make a couple points this morning, at the very least one. I don't think that was the key reason. Or it could just be because somebody wants to talk incessantly. Now, anybody that knows me knows that I have a knack of falling under that third category, talking incessantly. But let's go back to the second one, and that is to make a point. It's certainly not to offend, like I said, or to stop or thwart. I simply wanted to create an environment out here, because I think it's appropriate. I wanted to create an environment, short if possible, longer if it happens that way, so be it, that may promote some discussion. For me, here's where the discussion begins. It's where it started for me 6 years ago. It's where it came to a crescendo, if you will, in the last session, where I raise my hand and I say, I swear to God, if I have the opportunity, I'm going to drive this type of idea. I'm going to drive this type of initiative. Senator Shimmick passed out some very valuable information here. The requirements for initiative petition circulators throughout the nation. I'd like to ask Senator Shimmick a brief question, and it's not a trick question or anything like that, and I didn't confront her, before this, so it's just something that I want to get onto the record, if she would yield.
Senator Shimmick, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
A lot of information out here that you passed out, going to be very valuable for the debate. I admit that, and I'm glad you did. All the states that are represented on the information that we have in front of us, how many of those states are unicameral legislatures? Have unicameral
Not
legislatures?
all the states are represented, Senator Friend. I just
of all the states that are on the sheet,
only Nebraska.
How many of those states
1 minute.
implement a unicameral legislature?
Just Nebraska.
Thank you.
That wasn't
perfect.
Not hard. Senator
That was not
Friend.
hard. Thank you, Senator Shimmick. If I lived in Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Montana, particularly Massachusetts, Michigan, and Florida, I'd be real worried about the idea that I don't have any requirements for petition circulators. Those are flat-out representative democracies. You're darn right I would throw enhancements and parameters around what citizens can do. Those are pure representative democracies. We're not, folks. The only one in the country, one of the only ones in the world,
Time.
We are not.
Time, Mr. Friend. Thank you, Senator Friend. We have Whiteman, Harms, Burling, and others, Senator Friend, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. I want to continue the point real quick. I think we can toss out conventional wisdom when it comes to Nebraska. And we try to compare ourselves to 49 other states, we are missing the mark. Can't do it. This is not a question of moving or implementing a bicameral legislature. That may be a good idea, it may be a bad idea. Let's let that slide for now. But because we're unique, we have to understand that at least I believe that we have to understand that any infringement on the people's right to affect legislation or to affect our Constitution is much different than the responsibility that any other state has. If this bill only creates a perception, if the amendment and the bill only create a perception that it's not a real infringement, that's great. And I think Senator Shimmick is making a pretty valid argument, along with the Secretary of State's office, when I heard the testimony, that a lot of these infringements, and I got kind of animated in that hearing. I think some of it is perceived, but we have to be very careful. That's my only point. We have to be very careful, and if there is a reality here, and we are infringing upon those rights, the rights of the second house to affect public policy, then I believe we're making a mistake. Now, the amendment, in my view, this is the way I see it right now, the amendment, in my view, would create less infringement than the bill itself. I don't think it's just perceived. This is just my view after the reading, after the 5 readings that I've done. I don't think it's perceived. I think it's real. There is an infringement here. The amendment creates less infringement. I voted yes to move the amendment onto the bill, and I did not vote on the bill out of committee. In deference to the committee, in deference to Senator Shimmick, honestly, that's the way I felt. I wasn't positive about a no vote. The committee knows that. They heard me. But the bill itself, we attach this amendment, I think it creates less infringement. We don't attach this amendment. I think the bill itself does, in our particular unique situation, encroach on the second house's rights, its constitutional right. But Senator Harms brings up a good point. We don't want the outside interest, but you know what? Constitutionally, we can't avoid that. We can't stop them from coming in. We can't do it. I don't like it either. You know what they'll do? We crank it up. If we crank it up a notch, they'll just pay more money. As I mentioned in committee, the sugar daddies and the folks that have the money will hand it over. They'll come in here, they'll get the votes, and they'll not in here. They'll come into our state, they'll get the votes, and they'll get the petition drivers, and they'll do what they have to do. I think we all know that. There are freedom of speech issues involved here. There are ideas that stretch out into 9 and 10 and 12 areas of express statutory authority that we're monkeying with here. Now, my thing is, I'll just leave it at this. This amendment's important. I felt that way in committee. I think it is now.
1 minute.
I think that we're pulling some of the reality of infringement away from LB 39. If the amendment doesn't pass, my view is, and we're all going to have to sit on it, I think, is that we're infringing upon the second house's right to affect legislation and a constitution and their right to produce constitutional authority. That's the way I feel. I don't want to belabor this anymore. Senator Shimmick deserves a vote on this. I welcome more discussion, but the fact of the matter is, I'm reticent. I think we can just leave it at that. I'm reticent any time we go down roads like this because
Senator
we're unique.
Friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Frankly, I don't know that I can add anything to this debate, particularly about the amendment. But as a member of the Government Committee, at least allow me to tell you what I was thinking. When I first read the bill that was introduced by Senator Shimmick, I thought, boy, this is right on the mark. We're going to let Nebraskans control Nebraska. And we're going to control how much money they get paid, and we're going to control who distributes those petitions. And I recall myself this summer being affronted by many. And I listened to all the testimony on all sides. And in the quandary of it all, I again resorted to my simple mind, I suppose. And I looked at the amendment. And I think the amendment's right on the mark. For this reason. And here's what I was reminded of. In the first year that I was mayor in York, a man from Mississippi, a racist, said, I want to march down the streets of York, Nebraska. And Mr. Mayor, I want you to sign that parade permit. I had all kinds of citizens of York coming up to me and said, don't let somebody from Mississippi walk down the streets of York, Nebraska. It's our town. And the statement that he's going to make is not a statement indicative of the community of York. I had to let him march. He has a constitutional right to march. I didn't like what he was going to say. I didn't like the fact that he was from someplace else coming to York, Nebraska to say it, but he had the right to say it. And as I thought about this amendment, that episode came to my mind. Now, I may not like the fact that somebody from Colorado can stand on a street corner in Nebraska and stand there with a petition, but in my mind, standing with a petition is making a statement. It is making a statement. Their mouth may not be moving. They may not have an armband on or waving a banner, but they're making a statement. And I'm also thinking that if we stop a circulator from out of the state from coming in, not only have we potentially violated that person's First Amendment rights, but then put the shoe on the other foot. Let's say, for instance, that you're a great advocate of stopping abortion, and there was going to be a rally here in town or in your town, and a busload of anti-abortion advocates were going to come to Lincoln, and they were coming from Wisconsin and Michigan and all over. You'd want them there. You wouldn't tell them, hey, pack up. This is a Nebraska issue. Go away. You'd want them there. If you were the one circulating the petition on an issue that was critical to you, would you want to be hindered by the fact that, gee, they can only be Nebraska people? I think that there is a higher calling here, and it's the First Amendment. So I backed away from my original enthusiasm to see only Nebraska electors. The fact that we're saying that the petition circulators are not going to be paid per signature might, I don't know, but it might very well void some of the problems that we see in this. Petition circulators carrying a dozen petitions, not reading the objective statement, getting in your face, getting in places where we don't want them to be. When you're getting paid per signature, I think it incites those very things to happen. Thank you, Mr. President.
I think it would be informative to share with the body what we talked about. My aide was able to find a decision by the United States Court of Appeals, 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, 1997, saying that it would be unconstitutional to require petition circulators to be electors. And I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the argument here is that those who aren't registered to vote, who aren't electors, who want to participate in the petition process, if you would prohibit that, you are prohibiting their First Amendment right. And so that, as my understanding, that's probably why the committee had to amend the original bill as we see it on the green page. So in a sense, our hands are tied. I mean, I understand the intention that we want to keep rich folks from outside the state from coming in here and influencing our public policy, but there is a ruling by a high court that indicates that it would be an abridgment of the Constitution. And so in a sense, our hands are tied in that regard. So that would be point number one. Point number two, I do not believe that this bill has as its remedy what the intention is. As it stands right now, we will not be able to pay petition circulators by signature. That pretty much is what the bill is about in its present form. It was said earlier, and I think it's worth pointing out, that those, and I'm going to make this very easy, we're going to say rich folks and poor folks. Those rich folks that want to get a petition circulated and get a certain number of signatures, they're probably going to find ways around this bill that we have if it were to pass as law in its existing form. They're going to find ways around that. What about the poor folks? The folks that have an idea, that want to generate a grassroots effort to put forward an initiative. We're telling them that they can't pay per signature either. Now, those of you in business recognize that from a cost standpoint, paying for performance is a pretty good idea, and if you don't have a lot of money, it's a way to get something accomplished. I think by passing this measure, we actually make it more difficult for those without money to get something accomplished in our state, and probably just put another little hurdle that those with money are going to get over anyway. So I make that point to just to make it known that I do not believe, I think that this actually will has as its net remedy the opposite of what its intention is. So I thank you for listening. I'll yield the remainder of my time to the chair.